3 days before my wedding, my fiancé left me for my best friend. I was devastated, but I soon turned my pain into revenge. The spring sun poured through the cafe windows as I nervously checked my watch. 3 days before my wedding, and Jake had asked to meet urgently. My mind raced with possibilities, last-minute jitters, venue problems, maybe even cold feet. I never expected what was coming. I spotted him at our usual corner table, but he wasn't alone. Sarah sat beside him, her fingers nervously tapping the table. My best friend since college. The woman who'd helped me pick out my wedding dress just weeks ago. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my stomach knotted itself. Their expressions said everything. Jake couldn't even look me in the eye, and Sarah's face was blotchy from crying. "Rachel, I need to talk to you," Jake finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. God, I don't know how to say this. "Just say it," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the panic rising in my chest. He took a deep breath. "I can't marry you on Saturday." The cafe continued bustling around us, but everything seemed to freeze in my world. Conversations faded to background noise as I stared at him, waiting for the punchline to a joke that wasn't coming. "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask. Jake reached across the table for Sarah's hand, a gesture so familiar it made me sick. "Sarah and I, we're in love. It just happened, Rachel. We didn't plan this." My best friend finally looked up, tears streaming down her. I'm so sorry, Rach. We tried to fight it, but..." "You tried to fight it," I repeated, my voice hollow. "My fiancé and my maid of honor. How convenient." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. People turned to stare, but I didn't care. The engagement ring felt like it was burning my finger. I slipped it off and placed it gently on the table. "Rachel, please." Jake reached for my arm, but I pulled away. I left without another word, walking straight into the spring sunshine that now felt like a cruel joke. The pain was unbearable, but deep inside, something dark and determined began to take root. The days after the cafe disaster passed in a haze. I moved through my apartment like a ghost surrounded by wedding decorations I couldn't bear to take down. My phone buzzed constantly with messages. Concerned friends, family members who'd already booked flights. The wedding planner wondering what to do with the flowers. I ignored them all. Mom came over with casseroles I didn't eat. Dad awkwardly patted my shoulder, offering to have a word with Jake. My sister Lisa stayed overnight, forcing me to shower and change my clothes. "You need to eat something," Lisa insisted, pushing a plate toward me. "Starving yourself won't fix anything." "Nothing. We'll fix this," I mumbled, but took a small bite to appease her. She sighed, scrolling through her phone. Emma called. She ran into Jake's cousin at the store. "Apparently they're still going on your honeymoon." My fork clattered against the plate. "What?" "Yeah. The reservation at that fancy Maldives resort. Jake and Sarah are keeping it. Disgusting. Right? Something inside me shifted. That resort had been my dream, not Jake's. I'd spent hours researching the perfect overwater bungalow, planning sunrise yoga sessions on the deck, imagining us snorkeling in crystal-clear waters. And now, Sarah would be there instead of me. Later that night, alone in bed, I couldn't sleep. The image of them enjoying my honeymoon made my blood boil. That's when I remembered something that Sarah didn't know, that Jake had cheated before, multiple times. I'd caught him texting a coworker 6 months into our relationship, and later with a gym instructor. He'd begged forgiveness, promised to change, and like a fool, I'd believed him. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Sarah deserved to know the truth about the man she'd betrayed me for, and I deserved some justice for the humiliation they'd put me through. My sadness hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something sharper, more focused. I wouldn't waste any more tears on them. Instead, I would make sure their perfect honeymoon turned into the disaster they deserved. All I needed was evidence of Jake's past infidelities, and I knew exactly where to find it. I started my investigation that same night, fueled by a strange mix of determination and cheap wine. Jake and I had shared passwords early in our relationship, a gesture of trust that now worked in my favor. His email password was still our anniversary date, which said everything about his sentimentality. My laptop screen glowed in the darkness as I dug through years of digital history. Old conversations, photo albums, hidden folders. Jake wasn't particularly tech-savvy, making my job easier. I found what I was looking for faster than expected. There were dozens of flirty exchanges with Melissa from accounting, messages that went far beyond workplace banter. Photos from a business trip to Chicago showing Jake with his arm around a blonde woman I'd never met. Screenshots from dating apps he'd used during our brief break. 2 years ago, even though we'd agreed not to see other people. Jackpot, I whispered, downloading everything into a folder labeled Truth. The most damning evidence came from his cloud storage. Jake had saved intimate photos from at least 3 different women, all time-stamped during our relationship. My stomach turned at the images, but I forced myself to catalog everything methodically. By sunrise, my eyes were burning, but I'd compiled a comprehensive file showing Jake's pattern of infidelity. This wasn't just about one mistake or momentary weakness. This was who he was. As I sipped my morning coffee, a new thought occurred to me. What if I didn't just send the file? What if I delivered it in person? The idea of watching their faces when their perfect honeymoon imploded was too satisfying to resist. I opened my laptop again and searched for flights to the Maldives. The prices were exorbitant for last-minute bookings, but I didn't care. I'd been saving for a house with Jake, money that now served a different purpose. With a strange calm, I booked my flight and a room at the same resort. As I confirmed my reservation, a strange sense of power replaced my heartbreak. If Jake and Sarah were going to enjoy paradise, I'd make sure they suffered first. They had stolen my future. I would ruin their present. It seemed fair somehow. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, my final wedding dress fitting, scheduled for 3 hours from now. I deleted it with a swipe, then opened the airline's website to select my seat, one way to the Maldives, leaving in 6 days. The flight to the Maldives was long and uncomfortable, but the view as we descended made my breath catch. The ocean stretched beneath us like a canvas of blues and greens, with tiny islands dotting the surface like emeralds scattered on velvet. It was even more beautiful than the photos I'd obsessed over while planning my honeymoon. My honeymoon. The thought still stung, but less sharply now. Maybe it was the distance, or maybe the anticipation of what was to come. The seaplane from Malé to the resort offered even more spectacular views. I sat quietly while other passengers, mostly couples, pointed and exclaimed at every sight. A honeymooning couple across from me held hands the entire trip, occasionally stealing kisses. I looked away. "First time in the Maldives?" the pilot asked as we disembarked onto the wooden jetty. "Yes," I replied, squinting in the bright sunlight. "It was supposed to be my honeymoon." He gave me a sympathetic smile but asked no further questions. Resort staff greeted us with cold towels and fresh coconut drinks, then whisked us away in golf carts to our respective villas. My overwater bungalow was at the far end of the pier, more expensive but worth it for the privacy. I'd booked it using the credit card Jake and I had shared, a final expense he would discover long after I was gone. Small revenge, but satisfying nonetheless. The room was straight from my dreams, a spacious deck with steps leading directly into the turquoise lagoon, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a bed draped in gauzy white curtains. In another lifetime, it would have been romantic. Now, it was my war room. After unpacking, I ventured to the main restaurant for dinner, keeping my sunglasses on and a hat pulled low. I spotted them almost immediately. Jake and Sarah seated at a candlelit table near the beach. He was tan already, leaning back in his chair with that confident posture I once found charming. Sarah looked radiant in a white sundress, laughing at something he said. My appetite vanished, but I forced myself to eat while keeping an eye on them. They were all smiles, holding hands across the table, occasionally feeding each other bites of dessert. My stomach twisted with disgust, but I stayed focused. The moment had to be perfect. Back in my bungalow, I finalized my plan. On the third day, when the honeymoon bliss was at its peak, I would deliver my little surprise. Until then, I would enjoy the island, knowing that their dream vacation was about to become a nightmare. For 2 days, I lived a strange double life. During the day, I explored the island, snorkeling among colorful reefs, reading novels on secluded beaches, and indulging in spa treatments. At strategic times, I observed Jake and Sarah from a distance, always careful to stay out of their sight. They seemed to be following the exact honeymoon itinerary I had planned. Sunset cruise on the first evening, couples massage on the second, morning, even the private dinner on the beach that I had reserved months in advance. "Would you like another mimosa, ma'am?" A waiter approached my lounge chair, breaking my concentration. "Yes, thank you," I replied, adjusting my hat. From behind my sunglasses, I watched Jake and Sarah splashing in the shallow water, acting like carefree teenagers. Had he ever been that playful with me? I couldn't remember. That night, I finalized the email. The subject line was simple. What Sarah should know about Jake. The body contained a brief explanation and links to all the evidence I'd compiled. I scheduled it to send at exactly 10 the next morning, when Jake and Sarah would be having their romantic breakfast on the beach. Sleep came surprisingly easily. Perhaps it was the sound of waves lapping beneath my bungalow, or maybe the certainty that justice was near. I woke before sunrise and went for a swim, feeling the cool water wash away the last traces of my heartbreak. By 9:30, I was positioned perfectly, close enough to observe without being obvious. I ordered coffee and fruit, pretending to read a book while watching them over the rim of my sunglasses. Jake looked relaxed in his swim shorts, one arm draped casually over Sarah's shoulder. She wore a new bikini and talked animatedly about something, her hands gesturing in the air. At 9:55, I checked my phone, confirming the scheduled email was ready to go. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. In just 5 minutes, their perfect world would crumble. I thought about the poetic justice of it all. 3 days before my wedding, Jake had shattered my heart in that cafe. Now, 3 days into his honeymoon with my former best friend, he was about to experience what betrayal truly felt like. 10 o'clock arrived. I took a deep breath and waited for the bomb to drop. At exactly 10 o'clock, I watched Sarah reach for her phone. She checked it casually at first, probably expecting morning messages from friends or family asking about paradise. Her expression remained neutral as she opened the email, likely assuming it was spam or a resort notification. Then everything changed. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. She sat up straighter. Her finger swiped up, then down, then up again. The color drained from her face as she continued scrolling, her hand now trembling visibly. Jake noticed the change. "Everything okay, babe?" he asked, reaching for a piece of toast. When she didn't respond, he tried again. "Sarah? What's wrong?" She jerked away when he reached for the phone, clutching it to her chest like it contained nuclear codes. "What the hell is this, Jake?" she asked, her voice cracking. Other guests at nearby tables glanced over. A waiter hovered uncertainly nearby, sensing the tension. "What are you talking about?" Jake's voice held that innocent confusion I knew so well. He'd used the same tone when I'd confronted him about the gym instructor. "This," Sarah thrust the phone toward him, her hand shaking. Pictures of you with other women, text messages, dating profiles, all while you were with Rachel. Jake's face flushed as he grabbed for the phone. Let me see that. Who sent this to you? Does it matter? Sarah's voice rose, drawing more attention. Is it true? Were you cheating on Rachel before you got with me? Jake glanced around, noticing the staring guests. Lower your voice. Let's talk about this privately. No. Sarah stood up, knocking over her mimosa. Orange liquid spilled across the white tablecloth. Answer me. Is it true? Jake stammered, his confidence slipping away like sand between fingers. It's not what it looks like. Those are old. Out of context. Sarah laughed, a bitter, broken sound that carried across the beach. Out of context? I can read timestamps, Jake. You were seeing other women the entire time you were with Rachel. Her voice cracked. Which means you've probably been cheating on me too. That's not fair, Jake protested, standing up. You can't believe some anonymous email over me. You were cheating on me before we even got together. She threw the phone at him. It hit his chest and fell onto his plate. We're done. I'm going home. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stormed away toward their bungalow, leaving Jake standing alone, surrounded by scattered breakfast and judging eyes. Jake remained frozen at the table, his face a mask of shock. Other guests pretended not to watch while stealing obvious glances. A waiter approached cautiously, asking if everything was all right. Jake nodded mechanically, handed over his room key for the bill, and slumped back in his chair. I sipped my coffee, savoring the moment. My hand should have been shaking, but it wasn't. Instead, a strange calm had settled over me. This was what justice felt like, messy and imperfect, but satisfying. After 15 minutes, Jake finally stood up and walked away, shoulders hunched, phone clutched in his hand. He headed not toward their bungalow but to the beach bar. Typical Jake, seeking escape rather than facing the problem. I decided it was time for the final part of my plan. I paid my bill and deliberately chose a path that would cross his. My heart pounded, but not from fear. This confrontation had played out in my mind 100 times. I approached from behind, walking confidently past his hunched figure at the bar. Just as I passed, I glanced, over casually, as if noticing him for the first time. Jake looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and unfocused at first. Then recognition dawned, followed instantly by horror. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Rachel, he choked out, nearly knocking over his drink. What the? How are you here? I smiled, channeling every ounce of composure I had. Beautiful resort, isn't it? I can see why you kept the reservation. He stared at me, realization spreading across his face. It was you, the email. I adjusted my sunglasses. Truth hurts, doesn't it? You had no right, he sputtered, anger replacing shock. You ruined everything. No, Jake, you ruined everything. When you cheated on me repeatedly. You ruined everything when you ran off with my best friend 3 days before our wedding. My voice remained steady, almost pleasant. I just made sure Sarah had all the facts about who she was really marrying. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I once found endearing. Rachel, please, we can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, turning to leave. Enjoy the honeymoon, Jake. As I walked away, I felt his eyes on my back, but he didn't follow. I didn't look back. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks seemed to lift with each step. Revenge hadn't healed my heart completely, but it had cauterized the wound. I could begin to move forward now. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at the resort's upscale restaurant. The setting sun painted the sky in pinks and oranges as I savored each bite of my seafood pasta. For the first time since Jake's betrayal, food actually tasted good. After dinner, I wandered to the beachfront bar for a nightcap. The bartender was mixing a colorful cocktail when I spotted her, Sarah sitting alone at the far end, nursing what looked like her third or fourth drink. Her mascara was smudged, her eyes puffy from crying. I hesitated, contemplating retreat. I'd accomplished what I came for. There was no need for another confrontation. But something pulled me toward her. Curiosity, perhaps, or some lingering need for closure. I approached slowly, giving her plenty of time to notice me. When she looked up, there was no surprise in her eyes, only resignation. "You did this, didn't you?" she asked flatly. I slid onto the stool beside her, ordering a mojito before answering. "No, Sarah. Jake did this. I just made sure you saw the truth." She laughed humorlessly, swirling the ice in her glass. I should have known. The email was too detailed, too personal. She took another sip. "Did it make you feel better? Seeing us fall apart?" "I didn't come for therapy," I replied honestly. "I came because you deserve to know who you were really with." Sarah stared out at the ocean. "I thought he loved me. That what we did to you was terrible, but special, somehow. Worth it." "He loves himself," I said simply. "Always has." We sat in silence for a while, the sound of waves filling the space between us. "I booked a flight home for tomorrow," she finally said. "I can't stand another day here with him." I nodded, unsure what to say. Part of me had expected to feel triumphant in this moment, but instead I just felt tired. Sarah and I would never be friends again, but the white-hot anger I'd felt toward her had cooled into something more like pity. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry," she whispered, finally looking at me directly. "Not just for this, but for everything. You didn't deserve any of it." For the first time since entering the bar, I saw genuine regret in her eyes, not just for her ruined honeymoon, but for our destroyed friendship. "No, I didn't," I agreed, finishing my drink. I placed some bills on the bar and stood. "Good luck, Sarah." I walked away before she could respond, feeling a chapter of my life closing firmly behind me. The next morning, I woke early to pack. My flight wasn't until evening, but I planned to spend my last day at a different part of the island, away from any possible drama. The confrontations with Jake and Sarah had given me all the closure I needed. I was folding my sundress when a sharp knock came at my door. Probably housekeeping, I thought, but when I opened it, Jake stood there, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "Rachel," he exhaled my name like he'd been holding his breath. "Please, I need to talk to you." My first instinct was to slam the door, but curiosity won out. "How did you find my room?" "I bribed the front desk guy," he admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Can I come in, just for a minute?" I crossed my arms, blocking the entrance. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." He glanced nervously down the walkway. "Sarah left this morning. She wouldn't even talk to me before she went." "That's not my problem," I replied evenly. I know, he said quickly. "But Rachel, seeing you yesterday, it made me realize what a huge mistake I made." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to that intimate tone he'd used countless times to win arguments. "We had something real. Sarah and I. It was just a stupid fling. I miss you." I stared at him, almost fascinated by his audacity. "You miss me?" I repeated flatly. "After you left me for my best friend 3 days before our wedding." I was confused. He ran both hands through his hair now, a gesture of frustration I'd seen whenever he felt cornered. "Sarah was a mistake. You and I were together for 3 years. That means something. It meant something to me, I corrected him. To you, it meant having a stable relationship while you pursued other women on the side. That's not fair, he protested weakly. I laughed, actually laughed. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you humiliated me in front of everyone we know? Was it fair when you stole my honeymoon with my best friend? He reached for my hand. Rachel, please, we can fix this. I pulled away. Jake, you don't miss me. You miss having control, but I'm not your safety net anymore. I stepped back, my hand on the door. Don't contact me again. The door closed with a satisfying click. Through it, I heard him call my name once more before his footsteps retreated down the walkway. I leaned against the door, surprised to find I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even satisfaction. Just peace. The remainder of my day passed in tranquil isolation. I found a secluded beach cove on the opposite side of the island, where I swam in crystal-clear waters and dozed under the gentle sun. For lunch, I ordered room service to my deck, watching colorful fish dart beneath my bungalow. When it was finally time to leave, I felt ready. The resort manager seemed relieved to see me checking out without incident. News of the dramatic breakfast scene had apparently spread among the staff. I hope you enjoyed your stay, Ms. Chen, he said carefully, processing my paperwork. More than I expected to, I replied honestly, handing over my room key. The boat ride back to the main island was peaceful, the seaplane journey equally smooth. At Malay International Airport, I browsed the duty-free shops, buying small souvenirs for Lisa and my parents, little tokens to show I was okay. I was sipping coffee at the terminal when a familiar voice called my name. Rachel? I thought that was you. I looked up to see Nathan, a guy I'd met at the resort's cooking class 2 days earlier. Tall, with kind eyes and an easy smile, he'd been there on a solo trip after a work project in Singapore. Nathan, hi, I replied, genuinely pleased to see a friendly face. Heading home too? Yeah, my flight's in 2 hours. He gestured to the empty chair across from me. Mind if I join you? I nodded, and he sat down, placing his carry-on bag beside him. During the cooking class, we'd made curry together and talked about travel, books, and our mutual love of old black and white films. He'd been easy to talk to, no agenda, no pressure. I was hoping to run into you again, he admitted. I wanted to grab a drink before our flights, if you're interested. For the first time in weeks, my heart felt light, unburdened by anger or pain. Yeah, I said, surprising myself. I'd like that. We found a quiet airport bar where Nathan told me about his photography hobby and his rescue dog back in Boston. I shared stories about my job in publishing and my dream of writing a novel someday. Neither of us mentioned relationships or past heartbreaks. It was refreshingly simple. When it was time for his flight, he hesitated before standing. Would it be too forward to ask for your number? I'm in New York sometimes for work. I smiled and held out my hand for his phone. As I entered my number, I realized I was looking forward to seeing those kind eyes again. It wasn't a new love story. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was a new beginning, and that was enough. As I sipped my drink with Nathan, watching planes take off through the terminal windows, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened in the past few weeks. The betrayal, the shock, the anger that had fueled my revenge plan. It all seemed slightly unreal now, like a movie I'd watched rather than a life I'd lived. You're miles away, Nathan observed, his voice pulling me back to the present. Heavy thoughts? I smiled apologetically. Just reflecting. It's been an interesting trip. Vacation? He asked, stirring his iced tea. I hesitated, unsure how much to share with this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger. Not exactly. More like an exorcism of sorts. Nathan raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Those can be necessary sometimes. His casual acceptance was refreshing. No judgment, no awkward attempts to change the subject. Just acknowledgement that sometimes life gets messy. I came here to confront someone who hurt me, I found myself explaining. And now that I've done it, I'm not sure how I feel. Satisfied, relieved, still angry, he suggested. None of those, actually, I replied, realizing it was true. I thought I needed revenge to move on, but now I'm wondering if I just needed to prove to myself that I could stand up for myself. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Self-respect is underrated. It really is, I agreed, grateful for his simple understanding. We talked for another hour, conversation flowing easily between serious topics and lighthearted ones. He told me about a photography exhibition he was working toward, showing me a few stunning landscape shots on his phone. I shared stories about the most bizarre manuscripts I'd received as an editor. "You seem like someone who knows what she wants," Nathan remarked as our time together drew to a close. I considered his words, thinking about how lost I'd felt after Jake's betrayal and how differently I felt now. I didn't before, I admitted. But I do now. And I meant it. For the first time in years, I wasn't defining myself through someone else's eyes. Not Jake's, not Sarah's, not even my family's. I was making choices based on what I wanted, what I needed. As we said goodbye at his gate, I knew that regardless of whether I ever saw Nathan again, this moment marked something important. Just weeks ago, I thought Jake and Sarah had destroyed my future. Now I realized they had only changed its course, perhaps towards something better than I had originally planned. 6 months later, I stood on a Brooklyn rooftop, watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in gold. My life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted when I boarded that flight to the Maldives. "Penny for your thoughts?" Nathan appeared beside me, offering a glass of wine. I smiled, accepting it. Just thinking about how different things look now compared to last year. Nathan and I had stayed in touch after our airport meeting. What started as occasional texts evolved into video calls, then weekend visits when he came to New York for work. 3 months ago, we had officially started dating. It wasn't the whirlwind romance Jake and I had, but something steadier, more genuine. "Better different or just different?" he asked, leaning against the railing. "Definitely better," I replied. "My book proposal got accepted this morning." His face lit up. "Rachel? That's amazing. Why didn't you say something earlier?" I laughed. "I wanted to tell you in person, see that genuine Nathan Davis reaction." He pulled me into a hug, lifting me slightly off the ground. "I'm so proud of you. A published author. I knew it would happen." The book had started as therapy, journaling about betrayal and recovery, but had evolved into a novel about a woman finding herself after loss. Not exactly my story, but inspired by it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Lisa. "Just ran into Jake at Mom's favorite restaurant with a new girl. He asked about you." A year ago, that message would have sent me spiraling. 6 months ago, it would have made me angry. Now, I just felt a distant curiosity. "Everything okay?" Nathan asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. Just Lisa being Lisa. Later that night, as Nathan drove us back to my apartment, I thought about how much had changed. Jake and Sarah had disappeared from my social media months ago. I'd heard through mutual friends that they'd broken up for good shortly after returning from the Maldives. Sarah had moved to Chicago. Jake had apparently cycled through several relationships since. None of it mattered anymore. My apartment greeted us with the familiar scent of the lavender candles Nathan had given me for my birthday. The place looked different now. I'd redecorated, purging the last traces of the life I'd planned with Jake. New furniture, new art on the walls, new energy. "Want to watch that movie we were talking about?" Nathan asked, shrugging off his jacket. I smiled, watching him move comfortably through my space. Actually, I was thinking we could celebrate my book deal properly. As we laughed and talked into the night, I realized something important. Those months ago, I'd traveled halfway around the world seeking revenge, believing it would heal my broken heart. But true healing hadn't come from watching Jake and Sarah's relationship implode. It had come from rebuilding my life on my own terms. Jake and Sarah had destroyed my wedding plans, but they hadn't destroyed me. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need validation. I had found something better, myself. And as I held Nathan's hand, planning our next adventure together, I realized that the best revenge wasn't ruining their honeymoon after all. It was the fact that I was finally truly happy.